But we had ideas and we wanted to better the world. And when you have that as a core value inside of you, later on in life, you want your company to still retain that core value, to be the best, to be making products that really help and change the world. A lot of people get a successful company going, and then they just learn how to keep manufacturing the same sorts of products and bringing in the money. And they rate themselves in terms of money. And all of our thinking and ideas from the very first documents we wrote, the first papers we ever talked about, the idea was to build devices that would really enable people to become masters of what they did in life, to give them much more capability, to make the young person that knew how to use technology more important than the chief officers of a company. And so that feeling was so strong, especially with Steve Jobs. They directed this company is known for the quality and the excellence of its products. And that's where we started from. Now, I was very lucky. I was the engineer who designed all the products when we started Apple, and I was going to be an engineer for life. But I was very lucky in my childhood that my parents supported my interest in electronics. I was good in math, I was good in science, that helps. But they got me kits of parts that you could build. And I felt special. Every time I built something, whether it was an amateur radio set, or just a little device that could make buzzers, or send signals down a wire and talk to my friends over the fences between our houses, I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm doing something cool. I'm doing something neat, something that makes me special in the world. And electronics, it was kind of neat. A lot of people in the school didn't care much about it. They didn't know what I did, but I knew inside that I was special. I was very shy. Shy people don't go out and communicate and socialize a lot. We go in our little rooms and we work on our own projects, and we do a lot of thinking in our heads, coming up with ideas in our heads. And when you can build something and see it work, it's so special. I got involved very early in learning about switches and then electronic parts that made decisions. Electronic parts, like a transistor, can make a decision just like a wall switch on the wall. And then I learned how to combine these little decision makers to being rule makers to playing games like tic-tac-toe. So I went up a nice steady ladder of the sorts of things you learn that eventually lead up to a full computer. And it took me maybe 10 years when I was a young child. Learned slowly, bit, by accident, but you have a lot of time when there's no pressure. You don't have a class where you have to get something done by Friday, and you're going to take a test and get graded. You don't have competition. You get to go up this path that is a part of your heart, the thing you love to do. I taught myself how to design computers. When I was in high school, a teacher saw that I knew all the electronics in the school. I was too advanced. So he arranged that I could go to a company and program a computer. We didn't have a computer in our high school back then. And I got to program the computer, and I discovered that a computer might do a million things a second, but it depends upon the human brain to come up with a method to make it work well and to get a problem solved in a reasonable amount of time. And while I was there, I also stumbled into descriptions of computers, things that you'd never see in a home or ever in your life hardly, descriptions of these big computers with switches for zeros and ones. And the description of the computer, I looked at it, and I said, hey, going back to my early school years, when I learned how to build logic devices that made decisions, I wonder if I could draw on paper a design that would equal a computer, that would be a computer. And I worked hard at it over and over my last year of high school and my first year of college, over and over, and taught myself with no books, no teachers, no university, taught myself how to design computers. As a matter of fact, when I went to college, my first year of college, Introduction to Computers was a graduate level course. Because I was in engineering, I was allowed to take the course, and I got my A+, but I wrote every program I could. I thought, this is the most fun thing in the world, writing programs that do things. And I was calculating tables of numbers, but I ran our class 5 times over budget because the supercomputer our university had cost a lot of money. I never related to money. I thought if you're a student, you're here to learn. And I was doing good things, but it's going to be a lot of money. Every time I saw a computer that I could come in at midnight and use when nobody else was using that computer, I would take the opportunity. It was just a love in my life. Eventually, I was able to get the parts to build a computer of my own design. A real computer that could run programs. Switches and lights and ones and zeros, all this geeky computer stuff. But I got the parts and I was building the computer, and I met Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs went to the same high school that I did. In fact, 7 of the first 10 people at Apple went to that same high school. The company was all started from basically good friends that knew each other, same area in Cupertino. And so Steve Jobs knew of digital electronics a bit. He had played around with it. He had had a job at Hewlett-Packard working with it, and he also liked fun, playing tricks on people, playing pranks and jokes, which I was well known for. And we had similar philosophies about life and the counterculture movement. And how do you grow up to be a better person than people have been before? What is a better structure for life and culture? And we share a lot of these thoughts about that and how it was reflected in music and how it was reflected in other things. Steve was very independent-minded. He was young. He didn't really like his parents that much. I didn't know he was adopted. But eventually what happened was I was sitting down and I would just design a little project and build it to have fun. One of the first projects was one that could make telephone calls by putting tones into a telephone. Steve Jobs came along and he always said, we got to sell it. He was always looking for ways to get money. He kind of didn't want to take money from his family, and he was always thought, we've got to have a company someday, because companies are where you make the money to build better projects, to change the world. He wanted to be one of those important people that's on Mount Everest, among all the people that are just like waves in the ocean. He wanted to be one of the important ones, like Isaac Newton, or Shakespeare himself, or other major scientists of all time. But he still wanted to go through what young people go through. Live with no money, live with other people that have no money, find your own way in the world. He was really trying to separate himself very much from his family and his parents that weren't really his parents. Well, I lucked out. Steve Jobs, I drove him up to college, and he wouldn't take any of their courses because they told him which courses to take. He was too independent-minded. He wanted to learn on his own. I lucked out and got a job designing the hot product of its time. It was equivalent to today's iPhone 4. It was the Hewlett-Packard scientific calculator. They interviewed me, they saw that I knew how to design these things, and they hired me because I could do the job well, even though I didn't have a college degree. So that didn't matter. I promised I would get one someday, and I did. Well, I'm working on the greatest product of all time. It's like if you love Apple, and you got a job to actually work in the company, designing the new products, you would love that job. So I loved it at Hewlett-Packard, and while I was there, when I finished my work during the daytime, I came home at night, and I didn't have any girlfriends or parties. I got to work again designing my own things. Whenever I got an opportunity, I got famous all over California as a guy who could design things very quickly with very few parts. And I designed some of the first hotel movie systems, and I got to design some time code readers for the old videotape days. And then I saw Pong, a game. And I love games. Games, to me, everything about the world that's fun, jokes, laughter is very important. I measure my life by how much I smile. So I saw this game on our television, and my mind did a translation. It said, I remember how television signals work, and I have a television at home. Input and output is always the most expensive, restrictive part of computer development. If you look at the stages of our computers, the early Apple computers took us to a human keyboard, something people were familiar with, and a video screen, their own TV at home. Very inexpensive output device was the key, and that's what started Apple. Now, I came up with an idea to generate color on a TV with a $1 chip back when it was generally $1,000 to buy all of the circuitry with transistors, using differential calculus to mix sine waves to create color. I came up with an idea with ones and zeros in a little $1 chip that, by all my understanding of color television, the color TV would think it's a color signal, even though it's ones and zeros. Digital color had never been in any book. It could not be in a book. It could not be allowed in a classroom to be taught. It could not be allowed to be taught, used in a business. But it worked. It had to work. And when I showed Steve Jobs, type a number, See a blue square on a TV, type another number. See a yellow square. Instantly, we looked at each other and we knew we had a hot product, the Apple II, and it was going to change the world. We had color. Nobody would have ever expected these things in the world. They would have never expected graphics where you could program moving colors and make animations. We even had high-res pixels, and we had paddles for games, because gaming and fun had to be a big part of this computer world for us. But that's where we decided to start the company, and we found a very important element, an angel who would loan us the money, who would put in the money. Mike Markle. He owned as much of Apple as Steve Jobs and myself. He came to work as our marketing person, and marketing would be basically, we'd be a marketing-driven company. This was the important way to key to success. But more than that, he was a coach and a mentor. Mike Markle had taught Steve Jobs and I what kinds of people we should hire, and what their job responsibilities would be, and what quality of people we should hire, and really formulated a good company when other young people with nothing but their genes really were stumbling around trying to become a professional company. So we had a coach, and he taught us what our responsibilities, Steve Jobs and myself, would be in this company. We started with one great product. We had a few failures after that, but our Apple II computer was so huge, taking over the world, that financially the company was in good shape and bringing in a lot of money. So we had a few failures. Jeff Raskin was one of the most important people in all of today's computers, because there was a point in time, way back, where you had to type command lines of computer text to tell the computers what to do and move files, Linux style and all this. And then all of a sudden we had this Macintosh with a two-dimensional display and a cursor that you could move in 2 dimensions, and little icons, pictures that had meaning, and you could even draw shapes. We had this whole new world that was so different than anything before. And we were just and it was such an enlightenment to the future. It really inspired us to believe in ourselves as the creators of the new world. Well, today, if you think about it, at first, everybody with the low-cost PCs, where you typed in commands to move files, you had to learn how to use it. And the Macintosh made it easy. A guy named Jeff Raskin had come to Steve and I and taught us this is how you should build products. He took us down to Xerox PARC Center, where we saw the mouse and the menus and the windows. You've got to make it easy to use. And that really, over and over and over, I've seen that when you make something easier, even one step easier, people prefer it. Over having to do one simple step, they prefer having to do nothing. And that's become the wave of today. Of course, every computer today, basically, you could say, is a Macintosh. That style of computer wound up very much discarded by the business people at first, but now every single computer they use is just like that Macintosh. We're on this road to really making things that are so different, not making the same thing better, but making something that's a totally different approach to computing. And that gave us a lot of feeling as to what we were all about. I had an airplane crash around this time. I was on the Macintosh group, and Steve took over and ran the group, and he put the product out. The most exciting day for me ever at Apple was the day that Steve got up and introduced a story about the old ways and the IBMs and everybody just following everyone else and doing the same thing as always with computers. And here was the 1984 commercial, and the girl with the hammer and the sling, and basically we're going to turn things over. And that's how we saw ourselves at Apple. Well, Steve eventually went away from Apple because the Macintosh wasn't selling and he wasn't taking steps and people didn't like him, and so he was sort of discarded, and he went off to start his own company because he felt his thing in life was to build computers. And when he came back to Apple, he had the maturity to run a computer company successfully, and he had the Macintosh, huge numbers of customers that loved the computer so much. We were so passionate about it. Even, as Tim Cook just said the other day, even if the Macintosh were lousy, people would still buy it. And you just can't buy that kind of. People would say they use a PC, but they love the Apple computer. They love the Macintosh. So when Steve came back, he had the right company, and the company was in trouble. And it bothered him because as a founder, you're idealistic. You want to make great products. And all of a sudden, Apple was just making the products that would sell every month, but they weren't like you look at them visually. Visual appearance of things. Are they really unique and better than something else? Human beings notice this sort of thing, and human beings are more important than the technology. So that's what took us into the products that we have today. It was taking a lot of time Now, Apple is known for its secrecy in product development, because in the old days, everything we did was of interest to the world. And nowadays, you almost don't know what's going on with the new products, what features they're going to have, what features they're not going to have. That secrecy is very important, because you take a small group of bright people. Any of you in this room could be in a tiny little group of yourselves and say, how could we ever compete against huge companies like Apple and Samsung? Well, it turns out those companies still boil every project down to a small group of smart people. So you can actually do as well if you're smart. You just have to realize that grow at the rate that you have resources to grow. So we sat down, and Apple now has small groups of people that are so insulated and protected from other people's ideas and criticism, and they're free, if they're bright enough and they're free enough, they have a chance of coming up with great products that are going to be good enough to be an Apple product. As soon as you see a new product, you look at it, you say, this meets Apple quality, or it doesn't. You can tell. It's like art, and it's subjective. That's where we are now. Okay, I'm done with my preliminary talk, and so now we're going to move into the question and answer with the students to bring out a lot more information that's more valuable to you. But thanks for listening to that short story.
All right, thank you very much.